Gentlemen, what is an absolute red flag a woman can raise on the first date? Story 1. Your well-meaning coworker sets you up on a blind date with her fun friend. You agree to meet at a bar, but then her friend asks you to pick her up because she lost her license. You get to her apartment, and she's arguing with a man out front. She flips him before spitting in his face, then gets into your car. It is at this crucial point you notice she brought a suitcase full of her things. After you finish the drink you ordered with your meal, she finishes her fifth one. The entire time you haven't said more than a few words, not because you're being indifferent, but because she always interrupts with anecdotes about her abusive childhood. The bill comes, she slides it over to you. She informs you that she doesn't have any money and assumed you had intended to pay for the entire date. On the way to the car, she informs you that she wants to have unprotected. Don't worry though, she tells you that you cannot impregnate her, she is already carrying another man's child. While taking her home, she begins gesturing to her suitcase while asking to live with you a few weeks. She is broke and destitute till she begins her new job as a stripper on Monday. The man she was arguing with was letting her stay with him till she saved up enough money for her own place. Unfortunately, that man had kicked her out since she was bringing other men over to his apartment too. In her opinion, it was unfair. After all, she never agreed to only be sleeping with him exclusively. After pulling her hand out of your crotch and telling her you're not interested, you get to the apartment you picked her up from. Unfortunately, you live in the same apartment complex, only a couple buildings around the corner, far enough from where you park but not so far that she doesn't follow you all the way to your front door. She sexually assaults you while trying to force her way into the apartment. You panic, but then hear your cell phone ring. It's a telemarketer telling you about your vehicle's expiring extended warranty. You pretend it's work, push your way outside, lock the door and hope she forgets the number scrolling across it. She follows you to your car, asking when you will come back home. You leave her standing in the rear-view mirror while you speed off into the night. You then spend a few hours sitting in the mall parking lot waiting for a chance to sneak back home, while on your third cigarette to deal with a second anxiety attack. Even though you previously quit smoking for over 1 year, you come to a grand realization. Your coworker is kind of a, edit clarity spelling. Story 2. I went to meet a woman from an online dating site, and at the last minute she texted to ask if I could swing by her house, which was only a few blocks away from the Starbucks we were supposed to meet at. That should have been a tip-off in retrospect, but we'd chatted a lot online, so I felt comfortable enough. Maybe she just needed a lift or something. Instead, I come up to her house, and when she opens the door, she is wearing an ankle bracelet. She begs me to please understand how she didn't want to mention it on the dating site and to please hear her out. I was naturally uncomfortable by this point, but also curious, so I sat down for a few minutes in her living room. She told me of this domestic dispute she had with her ex that had turned violent, and now she was on 30 days house arrest. A very overweight teenage girl came into the room at this point, and the woman said, "Oh yeah, I also forget to mention I come with this. Now I just wanted to get the out of there." I started making excuses to leave, but she kept trying to get me to stay. "Please, just one date after I am done with house arrest." The things I could learn from a man of your smarts. I said nothing besides, "I really have to go." "Well, think about it." I just walked out the door and she followed, explaining that the bracelet had a range of several feet outside. I was rummaging for my car keys next to my car, when she grabbed my left hand and slid it under her shirt, placing it directly on her bare breast. She looked up at me with a wicked grin. I got in the car without a word and just drove. I never felt so happy to drive away from a place in my life. So yeah, asking me about red flags may not be a great idea, though hopefully I have wised up since then. Story 3. She asked me to drive her back home to ensure she hadn't left her iron on. 20 years later, I'm still checking that she's locked doors, turned things off, locked up the pets, etc. Story 4. This takes me back to the early 20s version of me and a fine lass named Rebecca. We met at a New Year's party. She tall and artsy with some feather arrangement in her hair I complimented. Ooh, midnight and a proper kiss on the cheek with the promise of a first date to start 1991. Picked her up for said date a few days later and same hair treatment. She tells me she's obsessed with birds and always wears a feather somewhere. Okay, no problem. She's still cute in full light and this just makes her quirky, right? I was just a few YRS older and we went to a really nice Italian place near DC. She remarks how nice to be out with a grown-up as she's finishing college and has been dating boys. Nice, dinner's great until dessert. The whipped cream on mine reminds her of her last boyfriend. She then tells me in great detail how she stalked him, hiding in bushes near his house to spy, FING with his tires and covering his entire car in whipped cream and eggs. Isn't that just the funniest? Check please. Story 5. I hope you don't mind, but I couldn't find a babysitter and brought my kid. Yes, I do mind. You could have rescheduled. This is supposed to be a date, not a future daddy test. Hey, raise some money for you and the kid to have a nice dinner. Bye. Story 6. My brother was in the army when he was set up on a blind date by a friend's girlfriend. Apparently during the first 10 minutes of dinner she was talking about how she would be such a great and loyal army wife, and how she thought army wives were so brave and admirable, and how she would never leave him if he was injured. He had literally just met this girl. He stuck it out through dinner, faked sick and left. She pursued him pretty hard after, but he lied and told her he decided he wasn't really over his ex and wasn't ready for a relationship. He said about a month later she tried to text him with a booty call, and said she even tried to sweeten the deal by saying he didn't need to wear protection because she was on birth control. Like, how many red flags can one girl have? Story 7. Oh boy, here we go. Long story short, I went on a date with a chick and we were vibing really well before she turned ice cold and began acting like a At that point I just wasn't enjoying it, so I made up some excuse about having some stuff to do and left. Few hours later she texts me she was disappointed that I gave up so easy and she was testing how much I liked her. Needless to say I didn't ask her on a second date. I'd rather be single celibate than have a relationship with the entire cast of mean girls crammed into a single person with the maturity of a high school freshman. Story 8. When she gets too personal and wants to know the street you grew up on, your first dog's name, what your first car was, where you went to school, mother's maiden name. Story 9. She brings a guy from Tinder to the date. His name is Craig. He uses a paperclip as an earring. He spends most of the date sewing. Still wasn't the worst date I've ever had. Story 10. Had dinner with a blind date. Only saw her eyes maybe for 3 minutes before she was glued to her Instagram and Snapchat, giggling to herself and replying to her followers. Tried to have a decent convo, but she was like a that's cool waitress comes. She doesn't even bother looking at the menu, steak, fries, and a glass of champagne. Then out of the blue, how much money do you make? I got up, told her the date was done and left her at the restaurant. She was so glued to her phone she just nodded. She blows up my phone raging that I was supposed to buy her dinner and exclaimed she had no money or ride to get back to her man's place. So yeah, she was fishing for free food and drinks. Story 11. Telling you right at the beginning of a date how much she hates Martin Luther King Jr. Yeah, that was awkward. Edit for those wondering how it came up. She was talking about how she went camping for a long weekend, being that she had MLK Day off, but with a side note, ugh, I fucking hate Martin Luther King. Story 12. There are some good ones here, like mistreating servers, making it clear she sees you as a source of money and expensive gifts, or carrying on about an ex. I don't want to just repeat what everyone else is saying, so my red flag is anyone who seems to be constantly on or have something they're trying to prove. If they can't just relax and stop trying to show what an edgelord victim, not like other girls or whatever sort of character they're trying to convince you they are, being around them is going to drain you every time. It's not even worth it to me. I like genuine, real people who aren't constantly putting on some show. Story 13. There are a few. 1. She never bothers to engage in small talk during the date at all, and any attempt on your part is only met with single-word answers. Another would be if she kept talking about her ex during the date. Lastly, she answers her phone saying, "Hey dad, this isn't a good time," but you quickly notice the name on the call display oddly matches the name of your own father who disappeared when you were little. Story 14. Automatically ordering the most expensive thing on the menu if they are not splitting the bill, not treating waitstaff with respect, not trying to maintain eye contact while not being socially awkward. This one is context dependent. Constant use of their phone. Grossly bashing their ex or talking at length about them. Not the normal "oh, my ex was a," but really going on about it. Being generally inconsiderate or arrogant. Diverting conversation to talk overly about themselves, even on topics not about them. Not showing any interest in me as a person. Story 15. Talking about how they want a man who knows how to treat a lady, or checking out other guys with their eyes while still actually talking to you, or ridiculing things you said. Or telling you their ex-boyfriend is a policeman, and if anyone hurts me he will get them, or telling you they have a but he's going to be in jail for 6 months, or ordering as much expensive stuff as they can, obviously more than they can eat, because they think a date is a chance to burn a guy for as much as they can get, or telling you boo how their ex was in fact all their exes were assholes, or lying about their sprance or age before a blind date, or some of the first questions they ask. You are how much do you earn, what car do you drive, where do you live, do you own or rent? Or telling you their last was so generous he even bought you a house and gave it to you. 9. Korean girl in China receiving more than a dozen calls on her phone, mostly that sounded male, while still in the car on the way to the restaurant. Chinese girl, ID already decided not to date her again before we reached the restaurant. These are all things I have personally experienced dating. Story 16. She will raise a big red flag if she treats strangers like, you can tell a great deal about somebody by how they treat people who have no material benefit to them. Story 17. If she starts playing on her phone, that means A. She's just there for a free meal, B. She's already dating someone, C. She's not interested in you, D. All of the above. Story 18. Came to this thread afraid I'd see something I'm inadvertently doing as a red flag because I can be a little socially awkward, leaving this thread feeling more normal than ever. Holy guys, I'm sorry you're meeting these women. Story 19. There was this woman 20 years ago that I met because my mom knew her mom and both thought that's a nice idea that their only offsprings could become friends. That's what the premise was, go and become friends. Never met her before, she knew nothing about me, so, yeah, why not? Met her at a restaurant. Waiter ushered us to our table. We sat, and even before the waiter was able to hand out the menus she said I look for a man to have children with because I want children now. The waiter had that bro, I'm so sorry smile on his face when he gave me the menu. This entree was followed by a monologue of a list of guys who all failed in her eyes, because they were either from a bad family, somehow idiots, not able to have kids, or had some other background she disliked, and that she now have high hopes because her mom knows my mom and they told her that I am a nice and decent man. To make one thing clear, she was way out of my league. She was fit as and just beautiful with long black hair and blue eyes while I still look like Shrek. We both were on the same level of intelligence, but I never studied and worked in public service while she was becoming a pharmacist. She said on the first date that she wants kids ASAP. Now imagine sitting there in your mid-20s, with a goddess in front of you both intellectual and body-wise, that talks for 2 hours just about herself and that she wants to marry ASAP and also wants kids, she offered me to drive home but also insisted in telling me that we won't have as long as I'm not willing to marry her sick. So she drove me home, we talked about her studies, and then she became furious because a woman I know saw me in the car while standing on the crossing and smiled at me. Why is this woman smiling at you? Do you know her? Do you know many women? When we arrived at my place, I jumped out of the car, thanked her for bringing me home and almost ran to my door. She tried to contact me for the next 2 weeks, but I kinda managed to be not around. Learned later, she married a guy, got twins and then divorced him. Story 20. I went on a date with a girl who ordered a steak and a cheesecake and then proceeded to eat them at the same time, like in the same bite. Look, I get weird food combinations, but if you're going to make that combination on the first date, there's a strong chance you have some botus under your floorboards. Story 21. Caring more about money or superficial BS than the man she's on a date with, using her phone obsessively, ogling other guys while on a date. Those are the ones I just walk away from on the spot. Being obsessed with what you ordered for food, being a to waitstaff or other people, talking about their ex, at all. Which weeds out a lot of women in my personal experience. Story 22. Talking, could be friends, ex-boy-girlfriends, the service at the restaurant you're at. Per my husband, tell them to read this in the most redneck, hick voice possible. When a girl who looks like someone just pissed in her oatmeal keeps calling Angry Orchard Green Orchid, gets mad at the bartender by saying I done got one of these last week. It was a green orchid, and then turns to you and says wanna fist me later. I also like, personally, I disagree with my husband and believe this is a magnetic and appropriate way to exert one's dominance. And now he's telling me about her claim to be from a parallel universe that her pastor explained to her. Never mind, shut it down. Story 23. I opened the restaurant door for her, and she told me I don't need a fucking man to open my door. I walked her to the table, I gave her 20 for a cab ride home and walked out. Story 24. Apart from all the usual ones, I really know it's not going to work if they start complaining about having to walk a short way when together. I get it if they're wearing heels, but if we plan to go to a restaurant, walk around a bit then see a movie and 200 meters into the walking they start complaining, then it's just not going to work out. Story 25. If the man doesn't pay for the meal, he's not a real man. We either going Dutch or having 2 separate checks. If I don't like you, if you're nice, he'll pay, but if I'm not going on a second date with you, what should my masculinity have to do with your chiapass nature? When she says she's not that hungry then tries to take my god French fries. Story 26. A few weeks into dating my first real girlfriend, things started to turn weird. She started telling me that she was hanging out at an old friend's place, but one of his buddies was hitting on her hardcore. I told her to just walk away, but she kept making up excuses that they were all in a room together and she couldn't leave. I told her to tell him she had a boyfriend who wants him to back off, and she told me he started threatening me. She kept asking me what I wanted to say to him, but I just sort of brushed it all off because this was a conversation through a third party with someone I had never met before. Situations like this kept popping up. She would tell me she was around some guy who was being aggressive towards her, trying to get me to react. I kept trying to act tough to these random people 15 years old, but really I was just confused. After about a month of dating, she tells me that best friend's boyfriend texted her and said that he loves her and that they should run away together. We all went to the same high school, so I don't really know where they planned to run to. She was relaying all of this to me and I started to question it. He was such a nice guy, why would he want to break off his relationship? Why is this conversation even continuing? Why is he persisting? Have you told him you're not interested? Shouldn't you be able to easily shut this down? She gets frustrated that I'm not playing into her hand, so she calls me and decides to escalate it to, well, I'm kind of considering it. That was obviously the breaking point and a very easy response, really. Well, then we should break up. She flips her opinion really quickly. I didn't mean it, I was crazy, I'm sorry, I don't even like him. I'm proud of 15-year-old me for sticking up for myself and completely cutting contact. Turns out, which is pretty obvious in hindsight, that she just loved guys getting jealous over her and was lying the entire time to get me going. In every relationship I've had since, I've kept an eye out for the every guy I talk to is into me red flag. Story 27. Pistol falls out of her purse and it's not unsafe. She has to keep calling a friend to update her location every 10 minutes. Steals those little sugar packets that are on the tables at restaurants. Story 28. The clearest red flags are the ones where she has to be willfully ignorant of evidence. For example, if she's anti-vaccine or refuses to accept climate change as a reality, I will not be seeing her again. Similarly, if she lacks tolerance towards others, e.g., disapproval towards same marriage or religions other than her own, or is otherwise blatantly hypocritical in her beliefs, I'm out. Story 29. Late to the party, but here goes. I messaged a girl a couple of times on a dating app and never heard from her again, so I thought that was the end of it. About 2 weeks later she randomly answers saying sorry for not responding, but she was in a car crash and blah blah, even sent me a picture of a crashed car. This set off some alarms, but I figure it, so we chatted a bit and she wanted to meet up to smoke some weed and she was cute, so I figured why not. I arrive at her place and she gets in the car muttering something about her roommate taking in the toilet and having a conversation with her while she's in the shower. Ok. As we are driving to a spot to smoke, she starts telling me about the car crash and how it was a drunk driver that hit her and how my dad is a Hell's Angel, so we'll just get my dad and his buddies to pay him a visit. Excuse me, was all I said, and she repeated what she just said, this time implying some broken bones would be made and that she might even get her dad's Hell's Angel lawyer to sue him as well. Now at this point we have started smoking, so I was wondering if I was hearing her right. So I asked a Hell's Angel lawyer, and she fucking snapped back, that's what I just said. So needless to say she was freaking me out major by this time, and I kept looking in my rearview mirror half expecting to see her dad on his bike swinging a chain above his head. But nothing. She said some other crazy about working 4 jobs and that all of them were linked to the Hells Angels in some way, so after about 40 minutes of smoke and hearing all her Hells Angels stories, I politely took her home and my excuse was I had to be up early. I dropped her off and said it was nice meeting you with a smile and a wave. I cannot tell you how happy I was after I drove off. In fact, I was so happy to be away from the potential biker gang daughter that I started laughing my off. Full-on maniacal laughter. Just pure joy kind of laughing. You'll never forget how happy that laugh was, knowing I was going home to just my cat and not some crazy biker chick. Made me really appreciate being single for a while, sweet lord. Story 30 Personal experience asks you to drive to her dealer's place. Not for weed but for meth. You pick her up, she is in sweats. You ask if she is going to get dressed and she says this is what I wore to court this morning. It was a child custody case to get at least partial custody of her daughter back. Based on her being unemployed, living with her grandparents and showing up in sweats, I didn't even ask how it turned out. She notices another guy checking her out. You go to the restroom and when you return she's at his table. When this happened I instantly left. Hope she or him paid the bill and left a good tip. She is Mormon and or vegetarian. Story 31 Once started dating this gal who shared everything with me from her dog that she had to take care of for the last year and a half because he was dying, to the sexual trauma that she had been through, to her birth control that was suffering side effects from, to how much it's going to cost to fix her car. Nothing positive was being shared, and all the bad stuff she was kinda brushing over like it still wasn't the worst she'd been through. I had to ghost her because I'm a bleeding heart and even I couldn't help but want to try to fix her problems, but I had enough problems of my own to deal with that. Story 32 If I can add another. I met a girl online once and she gave me the standard 57 120 pounds, but when I got there to pick her up she was easily 180 and she said she thought once I got to know her I'd like her. I said I liked her enough to agree to go out but now I don't know what's the truth and what isn't if she based our first meeting on a lie. Story 33 A cloth dyed in the blood if the enemy, when they wave that, it's either a kinky sign or a brutal sign they want your head, and I mean the head on your neck. Story 34 I went on a first date with a girl once. She seemed okay, we had an alright conversation. Got into our likes and dislikes. I at that time had only recently started learning to play guitar, so I told her that was my new love. I've been a metalhead forever and told her I listened to a lot of it. She told me she liked metal too, and that she even had a Nickelback desktop wallpaper. Get the out of there. Story 35 I had met a woman on a dating site after a nasty breakup and relocation back to my hometown. We talked for a few weeks via text and started to make plans for a meet. She told me she was divorced with kids, and that wasn't a deal breaker for me. About a week before our meet, I caught a nasty flu. I was vomiting and as sick as I had been in years. I tell her that I have flu and we may have to postpone. Before this, she had been suggestive, but not over the top. However, when my stomach was in rebellion at the slightest mention of food or anything at all for that matter, was when she decided to start asking me to describe the unspeakable things I wanted to do to her. I informed her more than once that I was very sick and nauseous and in absolutely no mood to even think about. She took it as an affront and kept pressing the issue, so I eventually just ghosted her. She sent a few texts about how I was a coward or for avoiding her, then stopped after a couple days, bullet dodged. Story 36 I'm sure there are better answers than mine but there was this one lady that was at least 20 years older than me but I still went for it and gave her some hints every now and then. Mature women catch on very fast and know what's up without explanation sometimes. Besides that she has always been giving me a look since the beginning. Well one day I invite her over to watch movies or whatever we were coworkers she obliged and came by. She didn't want to sit down. She immediately had no interest in what to watch. A couple minutes and she says let's go somewhere. I go with her and first place she stops as a gas station. She puts the nozzle in and says you're paying for gas right? I don't even know where we are going and plus I left my wallet at home. She got upset and put the nozzle back on the gas pump and drove me back to my apt and left. I knew she just wanted to use me. I found out what kind of person she was pretty quick. She judged me by my race and had no idea I grew up in the ghetto and know all of those tricks people do to use people they think have money. Not trying to offend anyone but if you've been there too you would know it's true. Story 37 Getting super attached on or prior to the first date. Met a lot of girls online, and we would chat for a little while before actually meeting. I kinda see the first few dates as a friends with or without benefit sort of deal, like, you're meeting up to feel each other out, and to see if there's any interest. If there is, you keep moving forward. However, I've had a lot of girls that try to throw some of the boyfriend stuff on immediately, just talking about long-term plans, saying that you're perfect, and having the expectations you would have of someone you've been dating for a while. I had a girl try to get me to read to her to help fall asleep before we even met the first time. Another one started to argue fight with me about not responding quickly within like 2 days. A lot of them kinda blindsided me with some super long-term stuff, and I was just thinking, you know we met a week ago, right? To me especially if you're meeting someone for the first time ever, there's a lot of work to do before getting to the dating part. Meet up, feel each other out, then progress from there. It's not first date. We're together and we're going to get married and be in love forever. Just a big turn off. Story 38 I used to wait tables back in my mid-20s. I was covering the bar one busy Saturday. A girl arrived for her date just before he did. I spoke to her a little trying to settle her nerves. The guy arrived and she pies him, pays more attention to me than him. They go to their table. She arrives back 20 minutes later to leave me a tip and the check with her number on it. I decide to take her up and invite her out. I take her to one of my favorite bars for some live music. I'm a kid and she's a fashionable upstaged girl. The rest of the night she proceeds to lecture me on the bar and how unclassy this place was for a forced date and how her prior date that she bailed on for me would never have allowed it or even contemplated a place like that. It ended pretty quickly after that. Story 39. I was sleeping with a woman that I wasn't dating, and she raised a red flag that could be seen from space when she told me, remember that Coke you bought me last week? I saved the bottle. Hope you don't think that's weird. And I ran so far away. Story 40. Treating waitstaff like garbage. You could be Gal Gadot level hot, but if you treat someone badly who can't fight back for fear of losing their job, it's a no from me. Story 41. Bringing up crazy things she did to guys in past relationships. It doesn't make me think you're savage or cool, it makes me think that's going to happen to me. Story 42. Asking what car you drive and how much you make. Could not believe I was asked this on date number 1. I asked for the check immediately, also asked waiter to split the bill in front of her. Story 43. My dad recently started going on dating apps 3 years since my mom passed away. His first date he took to a steakhouse. She ate dinner, got up to use the bathroom and never came back, then messaged him about a second date. It's cool that women want to abuse and manipulate my dad who's had a harder life than anyone for a free meal, not caring about hurting him, so I'd say being a sociopath is an absolute red flag. Story 44. When they ask you to pay for something for them, or suggest that you do it for the next time. Went out with a girl for a really bad date. There was almost zero chemistry between us. Things got slightly better as the date progressed, but I still wouldn't even say it was in my top 100 dates and I don't think I've ever had that many. I offer to drop her off on our way out and she agrees. On the way to her place, we saw an ad for The Incredibles 2 and to strike up a conversation I asked her if she liked those films. She said she did, and then said that we should go see it next time we go out. Then she added, but you'll pay for my ticket, right? I laughed and didn't say anything because I assumed she was joking, and she said with a serious tone, don't be cheap. You got a nice car, it's clear you make good money, you can afford to pay for my ticket. She was out of my sights the second she said that. I just laughed again and said sure, we can do that. I dropped her off and never contacted her again. Story 45. I remember a very long time ago when I was like 19 years old and 44 now. I met this chick who was working at a store, Thrifties, that I was transferred to for a week to help them out from a neighboring city. I was working for the same store. We hit it off while we were working that night and long story short went out after work to a restaurant, Coco's. While we were eating, some dude walks up to our table and starts to ask her why she didn't pick up their kid since it was her turn to watch him. They start yelling at each other right there at the restaurant. Then the guy leaves, grabs their kid from his car, I'm assuming it was his car. I actually don't know, and plops him next to her in the booth while we were eating and left. I was polite and finished the meal and then said I had to go home. It was so awkward. The next day I had to go into work at that same store, but she wasn't working that day so I didn't see her. I ended up working one more day after that and still didn't see her, so I went back to my store after that and didn't contact her. 1 week goes by and she ends up calling me at work since cell phones were not a thing back then and begs me to have breakfast with her so she can explain things. I have no idea why, but I ended up saying yes and met her the following Saturday in her city at some breakfast place. I show up at the restaurant and she is sitting there with her mother and grandmother. The girl then begins to apologize to me for what happened. She's crying and begging me for a second chance. While at the same time her mother and grandmother were begging me to give her a second chance to who, by the way, I have never met before, and I literally just met her. I can't remember the exact details of what happened at the end of that breakfast, but I never saw her again. I thought I was in the Twilight Zone. Still to this day, I always wonder how that dude knew we were at the restaurant since no one had cell phones back then. Story 46. Not a first date, but my ex broke up with me because I wasn't putting enough into the relationship. I didn't buy her a 4-month anniversary present, then begged to get back together with me, and continued to complain that I didn't buy her things. Excuse me, lady, but I just found out my cat is ill and need to pay for her meds. Presents can wait. I'm so glad that relationship is over. Story 47. She asked me to take her shopping on our second date. I have my dad drop us off, didn't have my license at the time, age 15. So anyways, she takes me to Victoria's Secret to shop for clothes and stuff. About an hour later and a half later she thinks she has enough things and asks me to help take her things to go check out at the counter. I grab the rest of her things and take them over to the counter to pay. That's when she just kinda stands there and acts like gonna pay. I said something like, haha, this is gonna be expensive. Where do you work? And she says something like, what do you mean? I thought you were helping me out with this. I kinda just asked if she was joking, and when she confirmed multiple times that she wasn't. She claimed it's not okay to make the lady in a relationship happy or some bullshit. First of all, we went on 1 date-ish movies and now today this is not a relationship. Second of all, I'm 15, I don't have 150 to waste on clothes for someone I've spent all of maybe 6 hours of my life on. I keep refusing to pay, mostly saying that I don't have the money to pay in the first place. Even if I wanted to, she calls her dad and has him pick her up instead of waiting for mine. Praying my date next weekend doesn't go the next way. I've only dated 2 people before and she was the first. I don't think this girl is the same way as the last at all though, so I think we'll work out.